and welcome to the DEI Candidate Spotlight for Monday, September 27th, 2021. My name is Sue Kim, and I am a resident of Lowell and co-chair of the DEI Consortium's Communications Committee. The DEI Consortium Lowell is a grassroots organization of community members whose mission is to dismantle racism, amplify unheard voices, and lead impactful action for a just and equitable Lowell. The purpose of the DEI Candidate Spotlight is to provide an opportunity for you to hear from candidates for Lowell City Council and School Committee about their records and priorities around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tonight, we will be highlighting two candidates from whose areas include the downtown area. So first, from 7 to 7:30 is Hilary Clark, who is running for school committee in District 2, which includes downtown as well as parts of Centerville and Pawtuckaville. And then from 7:30 to 8 p.m., Wayne Jenness, who is running for city council in District 4. And if you have questions about what your districts are, you can go to lowellma.gov/findmydistrict. So we'll start with our first candidate. I'm going to turn it over to Hilary Clark and ask her to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about herself, why she's running, and some of her priorities, particularly around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also just priorities for her in general.
Thank you, Sue. And thank you, DEI, for having this event. My name is Hilary Clark. I am running for re-election to the Lowell Public School Committee, and I am running it for District 2, which is a combination of District 2 and District 4 for these on the city council side. But anyways, downtown and Centerville is the area that I will be looking to represent. So this will be, I'm in my first term as an elected school committee member, and I have lived here in downtown for almost 10 years with my husband and my daughter. And I believe very strongly, I'm very passionate about public education. And I believe Lowell is a real gem in that we can have families and students attend school in a public environment from pre-K all the way through a doctorate degree. And so I really am happy to be here. I'm happy to advocate for a strong public school system for our youngest community members. And professionally, I work in human resources at the university, UMass Lowell. And for me, I am feeling very strongly about collaboration, working together with my fellow committee members, as well as the administration, our community partners, teachers, staff. We need to work together with the mission of doing the best we can for our students. I also believe that family engagement is critically important. We need our families as partners as well in the mission of doing right by our children. And so making sure that that relationship is strong, making sure that families feel welcomed into school, the school environment, welcomed by teachers, that there can be relationships built that can just grow and become strong over time, as well as engaging families in the language that they are able to understand and participate, and the ways that they can participate. That's very important. And we've done a great job of improving that over the last year, 2 years, but there's always more work to do. So I also think that it's very important to be making decisions based on data. So data-driven decision makings is critical. We need to have the data in a format that can be understood and accessed in a way that people can look at it, understand, and then be able to again make decisions using that information. But data will help us see where there are things that we need to focus on, where there may be things that are impacting certain populations of our students. So we need to be sure we have the tools that we can use to guide us there. Equity is critically important. We have a school system with 28 schools, and while there is while our schools are moving in the right direction, we certainly have some schools that need some additional resources to bring them up. There are some schools that have waiting lists, and there are other schools that don't. And so we want to make sure that all of our schools are as strong and offer what our students need and can be met at all of those schools. So equity there is critically important, as well as continuous improvement. You know, the work is never done. And so we really need to make sure that we are all striving to do better for our students. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. So now I will turn to racism as a public health crisis letter from 2020, which was signed by over 1,500 individuals and community organizations, essentially calling on the city of Lowell to address racism as a systemic issue. And it specifically called for 5 action steps. One was to clearly articulate and communicate the city's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to establish clear and consistent protocols for data equity. I can't agree with you more about the importance of data, its accessibility, and its transparency. The mandating biannual anti-racism training for all city employees, including elected officials, establishing an independent civilian advisory committee to work with the police, and then also to establish a DEI office to work with, throughout the city. And so I would love to hear from you. This is really a chance for you to respond to both your thoughts or your response to like the letter and the proposals, but also your thoughts on where the city has come since 2020, and where we still have to go.
Yes, so we have a long way to go, but the work is, it's hard work, but it's worth it, and we need to do it, because I know that is one of the things that I hear often about Lowell is people come here and we really celebrate, and the diversity is so strong, but it's not necessarily embraced in a way that makes it our strength. And I think that's really, what the point of that letter is, as well as, again, just creating that welcoming environment. So I completely agree with what the letter has stated and asked for. I think it's important, and that the city should be focusing and prioritizing and putting resources towards those requested steps, because it's the right thing to do, and because it really will help us all to be better community members. So I completely agree with, like I said, I agree with all of the parts of that letter, but one of the things that I feel strongly, and I actually made a motion back in 2020 about, is actually anti-racism, unconscious bias, and cultural awareness training for the school committee, mandatory training. That is something that did pass, not 100% support behind it, but we did pass that motion. We have not yet had our training. We actually, unfortunately, had to reschedule a few times, because it actually was also then lined up with another day of a professional development related to just school committee norms, governance versus management. That was another motion that I made, because in this role, we are there to serve the community and do a job. But I've learned a lot. I continue to learn what this job entails and our role in it. And I think that professional development around that should be a part of what we do as committee members, elected officials, to be sure that we really are doing our job, doing it well, and looking to improve. So I think that training is critical. And I think that training, in fact, should be something that is happening through our entire school system. So from teachers and staff, down to, that cafeteria workers. I really do believe our entire school community should be receiving training on that, because what it does is it gives us common language, and we can really talk and use a lingo that we're now going to understand. People have different definitions of even what those words are, commonly used words. So, but if we're not understanding we don't have a common definition, then it's really hard to make progress. So I completely, I think that's a really important training, is a fundamental and should be happening regularly, because we can just then be communicating and talking about what we need to do moving forward. So yes. So I agree. I agree that all of us elected officials plus employees should be trained regularly. So
Thank you. So this is one of the questions that was submitted. What are your thoughts on the current, I believe it's currently in the proposal stage for the culturally and linguistic sustaining practices. And I know that it is part of, there was recently an update on efforts to advance equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it was sent to the subcommittee recently. Where that is, and as a candidate, I mean, again, I think this is key. If you were reelected, what do you see as the next steps, for particularly that proposal, but also some of the other related efforts?
Right. So the culturally and linguistically sustaining practices, CLSP, is a framework that is really going to be an umbrella where this work can happen. And the reason for this umbrella is there is a lot of work that's already going on in this space, but it could be considered in silos right now, just because we don't have a way for all of it to come together. And so I see this CLSP framework, and then the positions and the things that are going on underneath that framework as critically important in the trajectory of Lowell Public Schools. Because we've actually done about a year's worth of work putting this framework together. And in fact, so the work is continuing to happen. And I think that the update at the equity subcommittee will be really great to dig into the details, because there are a lot of details. But as part of the next few years, there are steps and additional things that are needed, and including resources to do this work and really roll it out in a way that makes good sense. And we know that it's going on across the district. So something like making sure that our materials are reflecting our student population is part of this framework. And, for our teachers and staff that are really interested in this work, they may already be doing things that are moving us down this path. But perhaps not everyone is necessarily on that same journey or going at the same pace. So training is certainly a piece of that is being offered under this framework. That's the plan. Another planned piece of it is staff to help with this work, because it can't just be done on the side of someone's desk, in my opinion. It needs to be someone's focus. And the idea of that focus is to be a resource and support for our staff members who are maybe interested, but their primary focus is to be in that classroom in front of their students. So we need to be sure we're adding the right supports in place to help people on their journey. So, helping teachers think about their curriculum, think about their offering, maybe even a little bit of a challenge, not in a way that is meant to say you're not doing this right, but how can we do more? What can we do better? So I do think that the suggested positions, which have now been put on hold, are really important that we implement and add those positions in the near future, when the time is right. So I believe those are some of the things, the other piece, diverse hiring, we have made progress there, but there are still some hindrances and roadblocks that in the way to that work. One being a pipeline issue, so not just that it might just be that there are really not a lot of diverse candidates that are maybe out there. So I believe, need to work on creating our own pipeline within Lowell, which we are primed and ready for with our university and college partners, community college as well. But creating that pipeline and really perhaps identifying students that are interested in high school. There is an after school program that when students may identify that they're interested in teaching, but I think we should go a step further and really be providing them with supports, whether that's financial, ways for them to get into education as a course of study, and then perhaps bring them back into our district as teachers, because that is a way we can almost grow our own and bring students back here who are familiar with the culture and just the way that Lowell is. So all of those can really fall under this framework, and there's a lot more to it, but I really feel very strongly in this work. So
Great, thank you. So another question that was submitted, this is related to sort of, equity and access. How can you work, or how do you hope to work to accommodate intersectional issues such as neurodiversity and other differences in cognitive styles for students in Lowell Public Schools? Right. And again, this is particularly for, as a school committee member, right? What can the school committee do, or what can you as a school committee member do to, to advance particularly accessibility for, neurodiverse students?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so I think, that being an inclusive public school system and being inclusive really means inclusive of all different types of people. And, neurodiversity is definitely a major part of that. So it's not just, we can think about, oftentimes it goes to race or ethnicity and maybe gender, but no, it runs the full gamut. How do we make sure all of our students feel welcomed, feel seen? And again, that's where we come back to that, even that the CLSP coordinator work a position I was talking about, because that is the space where we start to see, how do we incorporate, how do we make sure that our material is including all different types of people. Students need to see themselves in the work, and that includes students that have some different ways of learning, different ways that their mind is working. So I believe that is, that's definitely a part of that work as well. But also we just need to be sure that awareness and bias also comes up here, where we can be training and educating staff as well as students on different types of learning. I mean, I do feel that our students have a better understanding that. I know my middle schooler certainly, in classrooms and having our students be in classes together is really important. We actually were just having a conversation about that the other day, and having our students help each other is really, it's a good way for them to just be more aware and be, help to grow their own understanding of how similar we are, and then how different we can also be, and really appreciating those differences for what they are.
Great, thank you. So our next question, do you want to submit a question? I was wondering if you have a response to the incident at the LeBlanc school last week, specifically the heavy police response to it and the way the incident has been covered in local media. I'm not sure that I'm familiar with exactly the incident. If I missed something in the paper, that's my apologies, and it might have been something that I received in the email, but would the questioner would like to explain, provide more context? You can say it verbally.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can do that. I can do that, Sue. Thanks. So I have only kind of small. Sorry, my news source is also coming from the Sun. I believe the article was published today, but it seems like this is the alternative school. It seems like there was an incident involving 2 children there who were acting out fairly violently, I guess. But it seems like it was a situation where school staff were working on de-escalation, but also a call was placed to 911. 6 police cruisers showed up. That's according to the article in the Sun. Yeah. And now I believe both of the students are facing charges. So I think another concern that I've heard raised about this is the way that it's been covered. I missed this earlier coverage, but I think it was on local radio. And the mayor has been responding. So I'm also kind of curious about the incident itself and the police response to it. And, maybe you can talk a little bit about what you think about, the role
Yeah.
of resource officers in schools broadly, and then also sort of how that's been handled with the communications point person in LPS. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for giving me a little update. I think I did
For
miss that
sure.
article today. So yeah. But I think there is a role that school resource officers can play. But I do think that I do believe strongly in restorative justice practices. I think our students are developing minds, and we all have made choices that are not necessarily representing our best selves. And we need to take the opportunity to teach children and help them understand how their choices are impacting others. So again, I'm not exactly specific on, I don't have all the specifics on that particular case, but, and certainly violence is not okay. Certainly we need to make sure that our students and teachers, everyone in our school community is safe. However, I think there is also opportunities for learning and to immediately, jump again with not having all of the details, to jump to something where we are looking at, something that might have an impact on a student's life at this point. Depending on the severity, I understand folks might say that's important. That is a cause and effect, but I think this, again, there are ways to work with students to help them understand the impact that those choices have, and then in fact go a step further to make amends. And the research shows that in fact can have a longer, a much better outcome for all parties involved when we work together in those restorative justice practices. So I believe that would be something that may be useful here. The presence of the response from Lowell Police. I mean, I think obviously they have a job to do as well. And, maybe that was a slow day here in Lowell. I don't know that, sometimes you do see the cruisers go by and there's a lot going, and not always, is it they of course are there to make and create a safe environment. So I hope that that's the path that we continue to go down as an opportunity for these students to come together and maybe learn from what the incident, what was entailed there, but also to move past it and really take that in so as not to repeat something in the future. So thank you.
So our last question is from one of the attendees. Where do you stand on the neighborhood school issue?
Mm-hmm. So neighborhood schools, I think there is a benefit and there are pros and cons, right? But I think it starts with equity. So we need to make sure that all of our schools are offering strong, welcoming environments, and then strong academics, rigorous opportunities for our students to be learning and doing their best in school. I think some of the benefits to neighborhood schools is building community and having a close proximity to your school. So you're really developing, relationships with those that you live nearby. There's definitely pros to that. Families having access to get to school that isn't across town, that might be right in their neighborhood. But without that first part, where if all of our schools are offering the very best, if we don't have that, it's a difficult sell to say the other piece is reasonable, because then just because you live in a neighborhood, you're heading to a particular school, but if it's not really offering what we want, then that's where that gets tricky. The other piece is diversity here in Lowell, based on the consent decree is white or minority. So even though we have what would be considered diverse schools per the consent decree, we still have schools that are very heavily populated with particular groups of students. So in my ideal world, we should have schools that represent Lowell as Lowell looks around the city in each of our schools. So a real mix of students. That would definitely be the ideal state. And is it possible to get there? possibly, because, and that's something that I know we have started looking at. We have made some adjustments to our admission, our school assignment policy. There are some of the other needs that could potentially be met with something that looks a little more like a neighborhood or smaller districts. Would be busing, for example. If we're not trying to bus students just between zone 1 and zone 2, the current setup where the city is cut in half, there might be ways to save time, save money, save resources, and again, give families access. But what we don't want to do is take away choice from families. So what I've heard as a potential solution, and this would come, a ways down the road, if it makes sense, but to really create maybe smaller districts so that families who live within a particular district have access to choose from a number of different schools within that district, but it isn't necessarily half the schools in the city. But again, we need to go back and start with that equity piece. That should be, and that is what we are doing. We have, there are some schools in our district that are receiving additional resources and support as a way to bring them up. So they really are, feeling and looking like and producing what the other schools in our district are. So we need to start there. But I think there's some opportunities to look at that in the future, not quite something maybe more like a neighborhood model, but still offering choice and offering our students and our families what they need. But we've got a little ways to go before we really look at that. But I think there's some incremental steps that we can be taking that are going to benefit everyone. So
Hilary Clark, thank you so much for your time and your thoughtful answers. I really appreciate your taking the time to join us and your work on the committee. So let's give her a virtual round of applause.
Thank you for this opportunity.
So our second guest candidate tonight, fresh from his preliminary win, and apparently also fresh from the barber, is Wayne Jenness, who was running for city council in District 4, which is my district. I live in downtown. We would like to start by inviting Wayne to introduce himself, tell us a little bit about himself, why he is running, and some of his priorities, particularly around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also, maybe generally for the city as well.
Sure. Well, first, thank you so much for having me tonight. I really appreciate it. It's great to finally be with you in virtual and be able to meet and chat. So for those that don't know me, my name is Wayne Jenness. I live downtown. I live on Market Street in a condo with my wife, my dog, and our 3 cats. I've been downtown since 2009. I first moved to Lowell in 2005. In my time downtown, I've been involved with various neighborhood groups, various political organizations, and volunteered my time at nonprofits, helping with what I do professionally, which is I'm an IT guy professionally. So I work for healthcare institutions, educational institutions. Right now I work for a software company, just building, maintaining, and managing complex computer systems. So I've been doing that since I was in high school, really, and I really enjoy it. This step here to run for city council, I'm excited for, because the whole concept of district-based representation, as soon as that landed on the page as something that was a possibility, I got really excited. I was really excited to see the potential for a voice to represent the downtown. Since I've lived downtown, there really hasn't been someone who lives downtown who's been on the council. So I first started getting excited, trying to figure out who was going to run, what their platform was going to be, etc. And then as things shaped up, I was like, okay, I'm doing this work, I'm checking it out. Maybe it's time for me to run. Maybe it's time for me to step up and see what I can do to help my neighbors in the city as a whole. So I started the process of just talking to as many people as possible and trying to understand how things looked from their perspective, what the issues were, what possible solutions were out there, what the city was doing or wasn't doing that really had an impact on their lives, and what the council could really do. So through that process, I've kind of developed a list of things that come up in all these discussions as things people are concerned about. One of those things is the economic recovery and our emergence from the pandemic. We're still managing this situation, and our businesses have done a good job of limping along. They've survived thanks to the really hand-in-glove approach that the Economic Development Department has really taken with all of our small businesses around the city, not just downtown, but across the city entirely. And I really think that as we continue to roll back these restrictions and people become more comfortable going out and interacting with these businesses, we need to maintain that hand-in-glove approach to really allow these businesses to go from surviving, which we've done a great job of. If you look at other similar sized cities across the Commonwealth, I feel like other cities have lost many more businesses than we have. So I'd like to applaud the Economic Development Department and the city manager for what they've done to help us move along so far. But we really got to get back to thriving. I don't think any business has the business levels that they had prior to the pandemic at this point. So everyone is still kind of scrimping and just scraping by. So we need to bring people back to the businesses. And I think one way to do that is to really lean into the events that we used to have to bring so many people downtown or anywhere else. We haven't had Folk Fest in 2 years. We haven't had the sculpture race in 2 years. We didn't have the Winterfest, all these different things that are really an additive effect. I'm so excited to see, Lowell Summer Music is back. The LMA is starting to do things again, and people are starting to come back. And I really want to see the city lean into that and take advantage of that. I think it's important that we make decisions about what our post-pandemic life looks like in Lowell. If we just sit back and let things happen, I feel like all the communities around us get to make those decisions for us, right? Like they're all going to do what they're going to do, and we're going to be stuck either tagging along or just picking up the leftovers. So I think it's very important to take a proactive approach here, and really to continue to look at all the disparities that were laid bare by the pandemic and make sure we're addressing them, particularly with the ARPA funds that are coming in to allow us to do a lot of that, particularly around our public health and public mental health infrastructure that clearly could use some assistance. And there's clearly something that is an equity issue, right? Like a large portion of the city is not adequately served and doesn't have access to those resources that many of the more well-off folks do. And so I think it's important that we use this opportunity that ARPA is presenting to us to really invest in the future of Lowell and invest in the people in Lowell. There's a lot of greatness in Lowell, and I want to see us really lean into that and take advantage of that. Another thing I want to see us focus on is our green space. During the pandemic, we don't have any outdoor space. We live in a condo in one of the middle buildings on Market Street. Our outdoor space is the city's outdoor space. And to be frank, I don't feel like it's sufficient. The space we have access to, it can be more welcoming. It can be cleaner. It can be more activated with more events and things going on to really engage people and get people to use the space. I feel like our space is really underutilized. Excuse me. Sorry. So I want to see us invest in the spaces we've got and also keep an eye on our opportunities to create new ones. Hamilton Canal is a perfect example of this. We master planned that out 15 years ago, whatever it was, and things are just now starting to move along. And right now is the time to look at it again and say, is there a spot here for a park? What kind of park is an open discussion. I've had people tell me they want a dog park. People tell me they want a space for kids to play. People tell me they want just a quiet space to read under a tree. All of these things we can figure out, and we can have community input and figure out what we can do there. And so I want to see us focus on that in a more active way than what we've been doing. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But a couple other things that I really want to see us, I want to see Lowell work on, particularly with the next council, is around all the DEI initiatives. Particularly, you look at, we're bringing in someone to be the head of DEI in our HR department. The audit clearly laid bare all the work that is to be done. And so when we bring this person on, which I hope happens sooner rather than later, they're going to have a lot of work on their plate. And I think it's going to be incumbent on the council to help this person, whoever this is, give them the staffing and the funding they need to be able to achieve the goals that get set out. And additionally, I want to make sure that the next council we have doesn't look at the new election system as an end, right? As an accomplishment. To me, it's the beginning of an opportunity, right? We've made the effort. We've gone through this process to set up a scenario in which we'll have more neighborhood voices, more new voices at the table, whether that's voters, whether that's candidates, whether that's whatever. This is the start. It's going to be incumbent on the council to take this baton and move it. So I'm thinking about things like boards and commissions. How are they split up and how are they represented across the city? Our staffing in the schools, in City Hall, in every other department. You know, this is an opportunity. It's not a means to an end. We don't check the box and say, okay, we've met the goals of this consent decree, and now we can move on to something else. It's the start for me, and I'm really excited to hopefully be a voice to really drive that conversation forward. I think that's about it for an intro, and I'm ready to go from here.
Great, thank you. So I'm actually going to skip the letter thing, so I think that you've addressed particularly some of the issues. I think I'd like to make sure that we get to a question that's come up in a couple, basically questions about housing, right? And I think I know you have a lot to say about this issue, so I'll just kind of we've had a couple of questions. I'll sort of put them all together. But essentially the questions are all around the issue of affordable housing, right? So questions such as, what should Lowell do to address the lack of affordable housing in the city, ensure that longtime residents are not pushed out by gentrification, right? A related question, what do you think about zoning changes to create housing that is affordable for our community, right? It's, a slightly different, but related question is, how do we address the homelessness issue, right? I mean, but these are distinct but related issues in terms of affordable housing, homelessness. I mean, they're linked but also distinct. What are your thoughts on how we can address the issues of? We'll start with the sort of affordable housing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, like you said, these things are all linked together, right? The decisions we make in one area have knock-on effects across the board with all of this stuff. Specifically with affordable housing, I think anyone can look at the situation and realize that there is a housing shortage, and it's not just a Lowell housing shortage. It's not a Merrimack Valley housing shortage. It's really a regional shortage across most of what I'll call dense New England. Sure, you can go out to Western Mass and it's not quite the same as it is here, but all of these are linked, right? The decisions we make in Lowell can move the needle a little bit, but we can't push that thing all the way over and throw the door open. So we need to help. We need help from the state and the state government in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, specifically here, in order to make sure that the things we do are complementary to what is being done around us. One thing that we can do in Lowell, which will help, and I'm got my fingers crossed and I hope it happens, is to make sure we're using the new pool of funding from the Community Preservation Act. That the Community Preservation Commission is going through the process right now of figuring out how to split this money up and what they're going to do with it. There are 3 different buckets that things go in, one of which is affordable housing, one is community preservation, and one is green space, I think. What Boston did with this bucket of money is create a program called 1 Plus Boston. What that did was allowed their community partners to extend the limits on which organizations are able to do down payment assistance and help with first-time home buyer things, whether that's training, down payment assistance, mortgages, all of that, and it really opens the door for many people. A lot of the fixed limits for income or assets that are in the existing first-time homebuyer programs, are I don't want to say they're easy for people to hit, but many people come in above that. So by being able to use the Community Preservation Act funds to create a program to raise that bar a little bit is going to open the door for more people to buy a home in Lowell. And as we all know, buying a home is so important for generational wealth, right? Like, it's the biggest indicator of generational wealth. If you're able to buy a home, you are setting your kids up for a much better future, and you become invested in the community. And we have many people who grow up here and are priced out now and have to leave. And I think that's important to recognize too. Talking to some people I know who work in this space for first-time home buyers, what they're seeing is that people who grew up in Lowell, who want to stay in Lowell, by and large, can't afford to stay in Lowell. They're already moving. They're already leaving. They're going to Fitchburg, to Leominster, to Southern New Hampshire to find a place that they can afford to buy, because those places just aren't in Lowell right now. I went back and looked just to see. In 2009, when I moved to the downtown, I moved into the Boot Mills. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment with a den. It was about 1,300 square feet, beautiful, beautiful apartment, and I was paying $1,100 a month. I recognize that was at the bottom of the rental market as things existed after the economy blew up in 2008, 2009. But you can't touch a place in downtown for anything, under 1,700 for a one bedroom. And so I think there's a lot of work we can do there to try and, ratchet that down a bit. But we also need to recognize that the gentrification that people are worried about is already happening. A lot of people who are coming to Lowell to buy their first homes are coming from Burlington, or coming from Arlington, that whole 128 belt. They're moving out because they're priced out there, so they're coming to Lowell, which is now pushing people in Lowell out. It's simple supply and demand, and we need to recognize that that's happening. And as we're building policies and trying to figure out how to solve that problem, you can't solve for what you think is going to happen 5 years down the road. You gotta take in the reality of what's happening right now and include that in your planning. So I just think that's really important for people to realize and to be noted. But let's talk about zoning for a second. I think that there are some opportunities here that would make zoning changes that we can do that would allow for construction of things that can't be constructed now. I see someone in the chat is mentioning ADUs. I agree. I would like to see ADUs across the board. I would like to see them allowed.
Yes.
Yes. Auxiliary dwelling units, I believe.
Auxiliary.
Yes. Which is basically the opportunity for someone to build a small apartment home, whatever, second structure on their lot. If they have a single family home, they can build a small something if they have the square footage for it. Obviously, you're probably not going to be able to do it in Back Central, but you can probably get away with it out in outer Pawtucketville and things like that. People should be allowed to do that. In our more dense areas, such as, accessory dwelling units. Thank you, Yunji. In our denser areas, such as the downtown, I think we really need to take a step back and look at the zoning and look at what we're requiring for people to do when they want to build a new building. One of the things is around parking, right? Like, the city just did this giant parking study. We spent a good chunk of change getting some analysis done on our parking situation. And what this company found that did the audit was basically, we have enough parking, we just don't know how to use it. So I think it's time to take a step back and really internalize that, figure out what that means, and figure out where we can go from here. Excuse me. But I think that if you're building a small development, whether you want to track that by square footage, bedrooms, units, whatever, we should be able to say, okay, if you're in these really dense areas that already have these underutilized parking garages, you should be able to build without needing a variance for lack of parking spaces, right? Like, you want to build a four unit building? Great, go for it, do it. I don't know why people need to find 8 parking spaces for that. If you're right across the street from a parking garage, great. We have parking garages. The city owns them. It's a resource. Let's use it. So I think there's opportunities there to really kind of look and say, what kind of red tape can we eliminate to reduce the cost of housing? Because that's really what it is, right? When you're adding more and more requirements to your zoning code, you have to have so many parking spaces, you have to be set this far back from the street, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All that is just added cost. And a lot of places, it makes sense. You need them. Okay, sure. You're building a 200 unit building. Yeah, people are going to, need to figure out where to park some cars. But I also feel like that's a self-selecting thing, right? And it's reliant on transportation too, which is a whole other discussion we can get into. But the idea of transit-oriented development, which is what the Hamilton Canal was originally supposed to be, and then all the transit kind of went away from it, which I find disappointing. But there are opportunities there for sure. And all of this, to tie it back to the homelessness situation, there's a couple of things I want to mention here. Thing one is we need to recognize that the price of housing has a direct impact on who ends up homeless. The more housing costs, the more people are not going to be able to afford it and end up out on the street or in a shelter or otherwise displaced from their housing. So people need to realize that there's a direct correlation between those things. And I think that often gets lost in this discussion. Secondly, I feel like it often gets lost on the fact that everyone who's experiencing homelessness, they're people and they're citizens or they're residents of Lowell rather, right? And we need to make sure that the decisions we're making as a city reflect that these are stakeholders here. They should be at the table having discussions with us. We can't make these decisions without their input and without knowing what it is they're going through. And I feel like that's been a voice that's been missing from a lot of this discussion. I hope that we can find ways to include them. And I think that's really important. We also need to realize though that homelessness is not a Lowell problem in and of itself. Everyone who's here who is experiencing homelessness, not all of them came from Lowell. They come to Lowell because Lowell has the services around homelessness. If you need a place to stay, we have a shelter. If you need mental health counseling, we have the community health center. If you need food, we have food banks. We have all these services that people rely on that don't exist by and large, if you lose your house in Chelmsford or Westford or Billerica. And so there's a lot of inward migration that happens. And I don't think it should be on Lowell to solve this problem on our own. We need help from the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth has done a fairly decent job around family homelessness, right? If a family ends up out on the street, the Commonwealth has some pretty rigorous programs to get those people housed again, get them into permanent housing. And I feel like the support systems for individuals who end up homeless, experiencing homelessness, is not nowhere near what it needs to be in order to allow these folks to bounce back. I am appreciative, I will say, of the city approving or adopting the Housing First initiative of 2019. I think that is certainly the way to go. I think that there are a lot of benefits to say, okay, we're going to get people into permanent housing and then figure out how to fix whatever it was that caused them to end up experiencing homelessness to begin with, right? I don't think that making somebody be sober for some period of time or hold a job for some period of time before they have access to housing is conducive to really helping people return back to the life that they want to live. And I think that we need to work with the state and our federal partners in order to fund those initiatives properly, to be able to really work towards getting these people housed and getting them taken care of with all the wraparound services that are so important to help them return back to the lives they want to live. And I think I touched on everything that was brought up.
Yes, great. Thank you so
All right,
much.
thank you.
So that's great. And I can't agree more that, when we talk about the unhoused, right, that, that they should be at the table, that instead of othering them.
Right.
So the next question, there's a specific question I think that's related to a larger question, which you touched on, basically about sort of particularly public transportation, right? I mean, the specific question is, do you support expanding bus service to Sundays, right? But I think the larger kind of question is, what can we do to improve public transportation? I think that it's not a secret that we have a traffic issue in Lowell, right? But what can we do to maybe to explore alternatives, public, bike paths, whatever,
Sure.
alternatives so that to ease this traffic?
Okay, so there's a few different layers here, right? Let's start at the top. Let's talk about the LRTA. They are a regional transit authority as defined by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They are mostly funded by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So Lowell doesn't have a whole lot of leverage here other than to have our state reps make a whole bunch of noise. And I think they need to be making a whole bunch of noise. But I do think we need to look at the LRTA as a community partner. And we need to help them along here, and we need to help them help themselves in a certain way. One thing I think that's evidence of this is if you look at the LRTA website. The last time I looked at the LRTA website, it was only in English. We have 200 something languages that get spoken here in Lowell, and I don't expect the LRTA to launch a responsive website in 200 plus languages next week, but we should be able to find some happy medium where we can figure out the languages that are most used by our population who's reliant on the LRTA or would be reliant if they could access it, and help them get that information from the website, from the app on their phone, however it may be, to really help that. Because I think there are a lot of people who live in Lowell who would use the public transportation, but they just don't know how to access it. They don't know how to find a schedule. They don't know how to read a route map, all of that. And the LRTA website is not helping them. So I think there's some work we can do there that, the city could help with things like that to really move that ball forward and help them. And other things we can do is, as we look at construction on streets and, restriping things here and there, making sure we have bus lanes where we can to allow the buses to move more freely, to give the buses signal priority at intersections. Something that we're not doing now is something that we could be doing that may have a better impact, a better effect for people who are reliant on the transportation. If your transportation network is not reliable, frequent, and easy to use, people won't use it, right? It's something you see transit authorities often do. Saying, well, ridership's low, we're going to cut back from 4 trips an hour on this route to 3 trips an hour. Saves us a bus, saves us a driver. But that difference between the bus coming every 15 minutes or every 20 minutes can really make it unrideable and unusable for people. And so you can't just look at those decisions in a vacuum. And I think that we need to be very careful about that. And this does come back to funding, though, right? Like we talked about, in order to run the bus, you got to be able to pay for the bus. So there's a lot of work that can be done there, but I would like to see the LRTA become a more robust system than it is today. I think that it would really benefit all of the community to be able to have something that is reliable, easy to use, and convenient. Someone in the traffic in the chat mentions the constant traffic jam on Thorndike. Yes, that is a problem. The new project, the Big Phil, the former overpass, whatever you want to call it, will have bus lanes, dedicated bus lanes. And once that's done, that will help. That is probably the best part of that project. I would have liked to have seen it be a little more pedestrian friendly, a little more bike friendly, but I am thankful that there are some significant transit benefits. But I think that having the bus depot outside of the core downtown really impacts people's ability to use it. If you're coming from most other parts of the city, you have to go to the terminal and then switch to the downtown shuttle to get downtown. And I think that's harder, and that makes it less attractive for people. I don't know if there's a way we can find a way to route more of the buses through downtown and have downtown stops for them so that you don't have to make that transfer. or not as many people would have to make the transfer. Moving the bus depot is obviously a larger logistical problem, but I'm not a transportation expert. I'm super interested in it, but I'm not an expert. But I do think that there are things we can look at there. But Sue, you mentioned bike paths, pedestrian walkways. I think there's a lot of benefits that can be had by really taking a step back and looking at our entire transportation situation holistically, right? There are many car trips today in Lowell, whether you're coming from even the Acre to downtown, or you're coming from Centerville, sorry, to the downtown, or short trips like that. Lowell is not that big a city. It's not that far from one end to the other, but it is extremely difficult and hazardous, or at least has the appearance of being hazardous, to do it on foot or on bike. A lot of that comes from the fact that if you look at downtown, if you look at a map of downtown, downtown is an island. In order to get to downtown from anywhere else, you have to cross a bridge. Whether that bridge goes over a canal or a river, you have to cross a bridge. So those are choke points which concentrate traffic and make things really feel dangerous as you're walking or biking your way downtown. But there are opportunities here, and I think that we need to continue to lean into projects such as the extension of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail that's either just opened or will be opening soon. That's bringing the end of the trail from Cross Point to the end of the Target parking lot. Doesn't seem like a long way if you look at it on the map, but I think it really makes a difference. And I think that we need to continue to look for opportunities such as that, the Concord River Greenway extension of the Riverwalk. I'd like to see upgrades to the Riverwalk on the Centerville side of the river. I think that's an underutilized green space and transit corridor. And I'd like to really see us connect more of the neighborhoods together with these multi-use paths, with giving people ways to transit from one spot to the other without feeling like they're contesting car traffic. Nobody wants to walk down Dutton Street next to 305 Dutton Street with cars flying by at 40 miles an hour when Thorndike isn't blocked, but that's another discussion. But it's just not a hospitable thing to do, and we don't have to do it that way. We can find ways to make things more comfortable for people who aren't in cars. And the more you do that, the more people you're going to get out of cars, which is going to reduce your traffic. It's going to reduce your pollution. It's going to be, it has an additive effect. And I don't think there's any magic bullet here, but there are lots of iterative changes that we can make as we have opportunities to do so. And I think it's very important to really look at our transit network, not just from the point of view of someone behind the wheel of a car trying to get out of town or get through town. That was a very 1950s, 1960s way of thinking. That's why we ended up with the Lord Overpass in the first place. But it's been 70 years. And now we're starting to recalibrate and really figure out how to do these things in other ways. And I'm excited to see what the future brings, and I want to see us really invest in more connections, right? Make it easier for people to get from one place to the other in the city, whether they're on a bike, on foot, or even in a car.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We're out of time. Let's give Wayne another virtual round of applause. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. We will return next Monday for our at-large spotlight with John Drinkwater and Vesna Nguyen. Thank you everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you everyone for coming. It was really great to chat with you. Have a good night.